Hello everyone, I'm Wendell Jones and welcome to this edition of the program. The platform on this program, we examine national issues and we are talking about the economy of the Bahamas today on the platform. There are many professionals in our country who are quite conversant on the economy of the Bahamas, but today we have an economist, Mr. Rupert Pinder, who has been on our program before, and we intend to talk about value-added tax. We intend to talk about the banking system and how the banking system is dealing with consumer loans, among other things, on our program today. Rupert Pinder, welcome to the program.
Thank you.
Nice to have you here today. You have a long resume, and there are a whole lot of people in the financial services sector who know you, so we don't have to talk about that. Suffice it to say that you are also a lecturer at the College of the Bahamas, eh?
That's correct.
How long have you been lecturing?
For about 16 years, actually.
16 years?
My relationship with the college started in 1998. And then in 2001, thereabouts, I joined as a full-time lecturer. And so I was lecturing here for 5.5 years, and then I decided to leave the college in 2006 to pursue other interests. And then I came back as a part-time lecturer. But my relationship with the college spans about 16 years.
And prior to that, you worked with the Ministry of Finance?
That's correct.
Okay. For starters, how do you describe the economy now? Some time ago, we heard that we were out of a recession. There are a whole lot of businessmen in this country and other Bahamians who believe that this country is still pretty much in a recession.
Well, if you were to look in terms of the aggregate numbers, and when I say aggregate in terms of the high-level numbers, in terms of what's coming out by way of the central bank statistical digest, etc., you will find that, generally speaking, the economy has seen some growth. So there's been relatively, I think, around just under 2% thereabouts in terms of overall growth within the economy. So there's been some growth within the economy. Now, I do agree to the extent to which I think in terms of the unemployment numbers, the unemployment numbers still suggest that, you know, some indication in terms of a recession, because I think it's like around, I think the aggregate numbers is like around 16%. Right?
So once there is growth, of course the recession is over, because you cannot be in a recession if there's growth.
Yeah, because, well, the economic definition of a recession is really 2 consecutive quarters of negative growth rate. Right. So certainly when you would look in terms of the definition itself, we're certainly not in a recession from that standpoint.
Mm. Now, in the United States of America, the unemployment numbers have gotten better. The number of people who got jobs, we had several 100,000 people who have gotten jobs over the last 6 months or so. They've long been out of a recession, and there are a number of businesses that have grown very well. We're not feeling that in the local economy, are we?
You know, it's interesting because, you know, from all indication, the tourism numbers seem to have been on the upward trajectory in terms of growth. Again, you know, one of the things in terms of the overall prospects looking forward, I think a lot of people are holding out in terms of the Bahama project, in terms of the likely impact that would have on the economy. One of the things is that when I look in terms of, as I drive along the Cable Beach Strip, for example, there's certainly a renaissance, if you wish, in terms of that entire area. But, you know, I will certainly go on a limb and say that in the case of the Bahama project, in my view, it didn't have, looking in terms of the anecdotal evidence, I mean, I haven't seen in terms of any sort of analysis specifically with respect to the Bahama project, but certainly looking at the anecdotal evidence, I don't think it has had the impact on the economy as I would like to see. I mean, because I passed that structure no longer than a few days ago, and I consider in terms of when Kirsten International, in terms of when they were going through those various phases, I mean, you felt the impact in terms of the local economy, in terms of the domestic economy. Bahama, in my view, has not delivered that same level of impact.
Godfrey?
Mr. Pinder, are we tapped in to the right economic environment? Let me tell you why I say that. I watch Morning Joe every morning. Sometimes I call him.
I don't watch it.
I watch Morning Joe. And this morning, the Morning Joe, the analysis was that the U.S. economy will probably go about 2 to 2.5%. And this month, in a country of 300 million people, they only created 113,000 new jobs this month. In a country of 300 million people. And there are some 3 million people who have become, what they call?
Discouraged?
Discouraged workers. So over 3 million. So the U.S. economy is not doing that good. The economies which are doing well are the BRIC economies and the African economies. That is why I ask you, are we tapped in to the wrong economies?
Well, it's interesting that you mentioned in terms of the in terms of the BRIC countries, and
Yeah.
of course, for the listeners, I think it's important for you to find what you mean by the BRIC countries.
Well, because
in terms of Brazil, Russia, India, and China,
Yeah.
right? In terms of the BRIC
South
countries,
Africa.
although they have another acronym
Yeah.
that is coming out soon in terms of the other countries that they see in terms of some of the newly industrialized country. It's interesting that you mentioned that, but it's no cliche when you say that when the United States sneezes, the rest of the world catches a cold, because the U.S. as a single country accounts for 20% of global trade. 20% of global trade. I'm saying all of that to say this, that any sort of meltdown in terms of the U.S. economy or growth is not as strong as expected, that has a rippling effect throughout the entire global system, more so than any of the other BRIC countries. And although some people will argue that China perhaps also have quite a significant impact in terms of that. The Bahamas has always been linked
to the US.
To the United States. That's not to say that whether or not we should be looking outside of the United States, and if that is where the conversation is taking us, I certainly would agree with that.
But I think that is one of the trump cards of the Bahama Project. They're looking to the Chinese in terms of this whole new concept of apartment hotels,
But it's interesting that you said that, because in my view, a lot of persons have said that, let's look in terms of how we can diversify the economy. And of course, I can introduce a whole new different dimension in terms of a discussion. But in my view, we haven't fully exploited tourism as yet. That's my view. To give you an example in terms of what I'm talking about, what we have is what the economists would refer to as an enclave development, right? Whereby, for example, we have these large enclaves like Ecosse International, and then of course you're going to have in terms of the Bahama Project, with very little linkages with respect to the rest
outside
of the economy,
yeah.
right? A lot of persons have argued for a more integrative approach in terms of development. For example, we have smaller resorts. For example, I would be a proponent of having, maybe in terms of giving some of these concessions to a large entity, to perhaps create a center for maybe 20, 30 smaller entities on some of these islands. You provide greater local ownership, and you provide greater linkages with respect to the other sectors. For example, a European visitor, from what I understand, is not very appreciative of a Bahama or a coastal type of tourism. He's interested in terms of what the family island properties can provide. Yeah. And in my view, we have not fully exploited that. I mean, how is it that in 2014, we don't have airlifts to some of these islands in the evenings, etc., and so on and so forth? I mean, Exuma is very close to the capital. Ilutra, all of these other islands are very close, but yet they're very much underexploited.
Back to Bahama, I had a conversation with the chairman, Sakis Ismailian, and that program is being aired on Jones and Company. And one of the things that he said is that had it not been for Bahama, our economy would really have been in bad shape, because they hired thousands of Bahamians. They've built, many contractors got work around the Bahama campus. And so had it not been for Bahama, what would we be? What would we be? What would be the state of the Bahamian economy had it not been for Bahama?
it's interesting that in terms of that you mentioned that, and again, I mean, that's not to say that the Bahama project did not bring in terms of some of the positive benefits that you've indicated. What I'm saying here is that while Bahama is certainly welcome, I would go again, and the sun is almost becoming a cliche. Again, I would go on a limb, and a lot of these things just really depends in terms of what we had negotiated. Because in my view, why Bahama should be welcome, I feel that we should have been able to get more from out of that project.
More in terms of what?
More in terms of employment opportunities.
Bahamians couldn't build that.
Right?
Mr. Pinder.
Well, okay. You take the Coastal International project, for example.
I don't know no Bahamian contractor that had the workforce and the technical skills to build that property.
What I'm saying to you here is
it must have been done in conjunction with some outside help.
No, certainly, I would agree. I would agree with you on that. But the same thing would apply in terms of the Coastal International project. Again, I'm not an engineer, right? And I don't want to certainly talk a lot in terms of outer scope. But when you look in terms of a coastal project, for example, I mean, what is the fundamental difference between the two projects in terms of the technical aspect of it?
It's size.
Right?
It's size. They're building 4 hotels and a convention center in one shot at once. And they're opening 4 hotels and the largest convention center in the region, or the largest casino, at least, in the region, in December 2014. And the size of the workforce, the level of expertise that they have in meeting the deadline, I don't think that we had the capacity here to do that.
Well, it's interesting that you mentioned in terms of the overall level of capacity, because I can assure you, on the project that I'm sure there's also by way of a lot of unskilled and semi-skilled workers as well. But it's interesting that you mentioned in terms of the scope of the project. Then to me it also begs the question, and therefore you should have seen more of an impact in terms of the domestic economy, given by the sheer size that you've just mentioned. The impact should have been greater. As you mentioned, you said that if you were to compare the Bahama with Coastal International in terms of all that is happening all at once, well, in that case, the impact to the domestic economy should have been greater.
But you had an extended or protracted recession, and you had a situation where in other sectors of the economy there was little performance, or very, very low performance.
But
yes?
I just want to mention something here, because when Kirchner came to the Bahamas in the early 1990s, we were also coming out of a long period of a recession as well. Arguably not as deep as this particular recession, but we were also coming out of a recession as well.
Yes, but this is the deepest one since the Depression.
Mr. Pinder, the commencement of the Bahama project came on at a very peculiar time in global economic history development. Traditionally, we would borrow money from the US or from Europe. All these places here had no money. They themselves were borrowing from the Chinese. So the Chinese got this huge surplus, and what they say, if you want our money, you have to play to this tune. And part of that tune was the 8,000 workers. Now you need the money to develop your country. You don't have it. You don't have no other source. The ball game changed on us, Mr. Pinder. And as a result of that, we are where we are.
I don't think there's anything in there for me to dispute,
Yeah.
right? However, one of the things I think that we, and I think it makes for a very interesting debate, right? From this standpoint, and I think because part of the objective of these type shows is also in terms of educating the public, and also to create a platform for dialogue in terms of a discussion.
You see, I believe.
I just want to make a point here. And China has a very interesting concept, what I would call tide aid.
Yeah.
Right? And tide aid, to the extent to which, there are these loanable funds, but of course a lot of it really, in my view, goes back to really, in effect, subsidize its own industries, right? And I think we really have to look at that model and look in terms of how the impact in terms of our own domestic economy.
Yeah, but we have to decide whether we want development or whether we want stagnancy. And if you want development, that's the terms under which you get development.
It's interesting, and something just came to mind in terms of an earlier point that Mr. Jones raised, in terms of in the absence of Bahama, in terms of where we would have been, right? I look in terms of the high degree of liquidity within the domestic banking sector, right? And the liquidity, you know, it's just simply in terms of the amount, in terms of the available cash, etc. And a lot of it really has to do in terms of a lot of persons obviously were not able to qualify it, etc. So the bank had a built up of this overall liquidity in the system. The question is, I mean, what incentives were in place in terms of spurring domestic investment
But Mr.
in
Pinder,
the absence of some of these things?
we have high liquidity, right? But we also have high situation where people aren't paying back loans. The banks are,
the delinquency rate is
very high, extremely high.
It's the highest it's ever been in the history of the Bahamas.
Because people don't have work to earn money to pay off their debt.
Right, and businesses are not producing the kind of business as they once were. And so there are many businesses that are hard pressed. Businesses themselves do not qualify for loans, and consumer loans are to be gotten, but there aren't too many people who are qualifying because there are a lot of people who are deep in debt.
Yeah.
Businesses in debt.
Again, you know,
consumers
in debt. Government in debt.
Country in debt.
The country in debt.
No. Of course, these are all things that I know already.
Yes.
But I will tell you this. To the extent to which there is a high degree of liquidity in the system, and to the extent to which, for example, a lot of persons, as you've just indicated, perhaps don't qualify because of the high rates of delinquency, well, that suggests to me that there is a need for the interest rate to come down, and some of the conditions in which the bank imposed to have also been relaxed a bit, for those persons who can qualify, to provide them with that added incentive.
So we have.
So in other words, why is it that today, with the high degree of liquidity in the system, that you have some consumer loans that are averaging 17 and 18%? With the high degree of liquidity, how is it that today a person, let's say, who's looking for a $10,000 loan is paying the bank like $500-600 in fees before he even leaves the office?
You know, we had a friend.
A commitment fee to get the money.
But yet, we talk about the high degree of liquidity within the system. So in other words, what I'm saying to you here is this: if there's a high degree of liquidity in the system, there are fewer persons that are qualifying. So those ones who can qualify, in that case, should be provided with the added incentive, right, to spur the level of
in support of your
investments, etc. Then, because the interest rate is simply the price of money, right? Interest rate is really the price of money.
Right.
And so, for example, if somebody walks through your door, you have a product, let us say $400, right? This person has, I don't know, $98 or whatever. Nobody else qualifies for that product for $100. You say, well, okay, well, I'll drop the price to $98 to allow this product to move off my shelf,
Yeah, but you see, in support of what you're saying, but saying it in a different way, we had a friend, Mr. Al Jarrett. One of his biggest complaints was that the prime rate was too high. You remember John always talked about that the central bank needed to drop the prime rate, and by dropping the prime rate, that would spur a lowering of the interest rates? That never happened?
Let me tell you this. The prime rate is around 4.75% thereabouts. When you look at the prime rate relative to what the banks are charging, believe me, there's a huge spread within there. So the issue is not the prime rate. You lower that prime rate, and I can assure you, what it means is that you would increase the level of profitability of the banks because they're going to do very little by way of that spread.
There are certain regulatory measures which the central bank could introduce at a lower prime rate. And that's one of the things Jobs was talking about.
But then you also have to be mindful as well, is that when you lower the prime rate, you also provide a disincentive for savers as well, because there are persons who purchase bonds.
You get the money for savings now?
The interest that is given on savings is next to nothing. Between 1% and 2%.
Right.
Banks are not giving interest on savings. It doesn't make sense to keep your money in the bank. it makes sense to invest your money in land or whatever
Right,
else,
right.
because you're not getting any interest on your money in the bank, and so banks are profiteering, and the depositor, the
Losing.
person is losing.
Yeah.
You singing to the choir. You realize that, eh? But thank you.
Yes.
Right? You're singing to the choir.
So why don't we fix this? It doesn't make sense, Mr. Pinder, for a person to really put money in the bank today. Dionisio Diaghilev was on their show the other day and said one of the reasons why he is spending money building new wash houses is because
He
makes more money by putting his money in concrete,
Yeah.
or buying washing machines. He's expanding his business because if he keeps his money in the bank, he gets little or nothing for it.
Let me tell you another thing, right? You take the credit union movement. The credit union movement has done fantastically well in our country. And the credit union pays high interest rates in the banks. 4% in some cases, 5% in some cases. But there's steps afoot to corral the credit union.
So would you agree that we have bad banking policies here?
Well, what I will say to you here is this, and again, I make no apologies for it, and that is this. You know, it's interesting when, and I think well-intended, right? You look in terms of the mortgage relief program, right? You know, in terms of
that didn't come off.
No. But I mean, in terms of the whole design,
rescue program.
You know, in terms of the whole design, etc. I'm not talking so much in terms of the success or whatever with respect to program. I'm just talking in terms of the whole design. In my view, I think the emphasis should have been placed on banking reform, right? Because I think that there's a lot of things by way of banking practices in this country that we really have to take another look at. There's no reason why, for example, today, that, and it's come from the Ministry of Finance themselves, that says that, for example, 70% of government payrolls goes right back out in terms of salary deduction.
Yeah.
Right?
We're going to pick that point up. Let's take a break here on the program. And it's an interesting point, and we stick a pin right there. We're on the platform, and we are talking about the economy of the Bahamas today. Rupert Pinder, an economist, he is our guest. We'll come right back.